Hello, here we are outside St Werburgh's Church, Wembury, on a lovely sunny afternoon in April. And it's a very old church and been here for a long time, been a landmark for seagoing vessels. And it's built on Saxon foundations with Norman foundations as well. And up above the church are inner and outer barrows, which probably means pagan settlements originally, perhaps, and reasons why it was built here on the cliff no one really knows, but there are other churches around Devon in a similar position. So while we're here, we're going to go inside and have a look around and see what's to be seen. Ooh. We're just inside the door, and in behind the door is a little tablet on the floor to Elizabeth Taylor. And little Elizabeth was drowned in 1720, along with 20 other parishioners from Wembury, of all ages, who were drowned twixt the Mewstone and the continent when the boat tipped up. So you wonder, were they coming from Plymouth on a day trip, or had they been to the Mewstone? 1720 is a long time ago, but quite a tragedy. And the only tombstone we have is little Elizabeth Taylor. Her parents were landowners in Down Thomas and lived at Taylor's farm, which later became Studden Court. We're going to move along the end of the church to the south door. And on the wall here we have a tablet to Sir Henry and Lady Studholme. Sir Henry came here in about 1948 and lived in Wembury House, and was the MP for Tavistock for many, many years. And after he passed away in 1887, the estate was sold. 1987. Pardon? 1987. The estate was sold, and Lady Judith moved away, but she did go on to live to be 103. So they were good supporters of the church and always sat in the front pew on the left. The tablet on the wall here is the Second World War memorial with all the names of the Wembury guys who lost their life. And it says the treble bell in the tower was cast and dedicated in their remembrance. So we have a memorial here, and we also have the Wembury War Memorial Hall, which is also a memorial to them as well. On the wall there we have the coat of arms of King George III, 1812. And behind me here is this very large vault dedicated to Lady Narborough. Lady Narborough was the daughter of Josias Comedy of Langdon, and at the age of 19 she was married in this church to Lord Narborough, who was a 32-year-old widower. And within 12 months the poor girl was back here to be buried, and it says on the plaque, it says died of a cough while big with child. So perhaps she had TB, but she was the third child of Josias to die. He had 2 young sons that died previously. So I guess the memorial demonstrates the size of his grief, I should imagine. Okay. Here we are at the south door. And above the door is the memorial to the First World War lads who lost their lives, local boys. And underneath that is a brass memorial to Laura Carmody, who was the last Carmody in Wembury. And after leaving Langdon Court, she went to live in Knighton Villa, and that was where she died. She was the last one of the Carmodys. The south door is a lot lower, and the south porch, which was the original entrance to the church, it's got cobble floor and is very ancient. But you can see that the new floor that we're standing on is higher than the original, and there's a big step up. So I think probably the floor has been rearranged in the restoration. Up above here we have a tablet to William Henry Prance and his wife Elizabeth Penrose, and he lived to be 90. They owned the manor of Down Thomas, where Manor Farm is, and the Prances inherited it from the Connell family, and we will speak of the Connells when we got the main aisle in a minute. In the floor of the south aisle we've got 5 ledgers on the floor, and this big one here at the end is to Edward Attrell and his wife Hannah. Edward Attrell came here and farmed at Ranelagh, and he was the estate manager for Admiral Carmody when Admiral Carmody came and took over the Langdon estate. That was when the Attrells came, and Edward was his main man. This lovely stained glass window of the Poor Fisherman is dedicated to the Sir Richard Corey of Langdon, who restored the church in 1886. In the floor here we have Priscilla, the wife of John Lay, and they farmed at Down Thomas, and the Lay's tenement became Taylor's farm and then later Stadden Court. So they were quite big farmers in their day. And above them we have Benjamin. This one's dedicated to Benjamin Love. He was the vicar here, and he was friendly with the Carmodys, and they first of all made him rector of Hittersley, which is one of their manors, and then he became the vicar of Wembury, and he lived in what is now Langdon Barton farmhouse. That was the vicarage at the time, and he married Elizabeth Taylor from Down Thomas, and sadly the first child, Benjamin, is buried here, but they did have more children. But Benjamin, the vicar, didn't live too long. He died quite young as well. And above him we have another connection to the church. This is Josias Harwood, and Josias Harwood's daughter married Mary Ann, married the Reverend Perry, who was the vicar here before the Reverend Love, and Reverend Perry came and married Josias Harwood's daughter. Josias Harwood was a landowner in Down Thomas and inherited the land from Francis Ryder, the last of the Ryders, and farmed at Barton Farm. We have here hanging in the South Aisle the flags from Australia. They are the flags of Western Australia and the Australian flag given by the consul from Australia. We had an Edmund Lockyer festival at one time, and they came and presented a plaque, and the connection is Edmund Lockyer in 1827 raced the French and the Dutch to claim Western Australia for the Crown, and landed at Albany and proclaimed it British territory. So as the Lockyers came from Wembury, hence we have the flags here flying. Up above here on the wall we have a very large plaque dedicated to Sir Edward Thornton's wife and some of his children. Sir Edward came to live in Wembury House when the Lockyers moved out, and he was a very decorated diplomat, and he'd been involved during the Napoleonic times, and had decorations from Portugal and Sweden. And he came to live at Wembury House and had several children. And he had 5 sons and a daughter. And sadly, while he was living there, 4 of his sons died during their teenage years. One as a midshipman on board a ship, and one, poor Dudley, drowned in the Yelm. So that is a monument there, but I can't see that Dudley's on the list. There's some of his sons there, and there's another plaque on the main aisle to Sir Edward himself. This lovely window here is the Good Shepherd, and it's dedicated to Mary Elizabeth Hannaford, and she lived in the farm next to mine at Spirewell, and she was sadly bedridden for most of her life, and I remember as a small boy going in to see her in Spirewell farmhouse, and her sister Babs has had the window put there in her memory. Mrs. Penny. Here we are in the corner, and in the floor here is a tablet to Elizabeth Molesworth, and the Molesworths came to live in Wembury House, and it was before the Lockyer's time, and sadly they had a rather tragic time, as poor Elizabeth died after 2 or 3 years and left 2 small daughters, and this was followed a couple of years later by her husband, and then 6 months later the other daughter, Barbara, died, so that just left one daughter to be the heiress, and she went on to live in London with Lady Lucan and became the wife of Lord Camden. So Earl Camden became the owner of Wembury Manor at one time. Above Elizabeth Molesworth, you can see the doorway, a filled-in doorway that was the entrance to how you got up onto the rood screen. There would be steps in there, and you go up around, get up onto the rood screen, which went across here. And above that is tablet dedicated to Edward Aylmer Montague Leodet, who was the husband of Edith Maria Corey, the youngest of the Corey girls, and sadly she died when she was only 22, and he followed not long after, and is buried at sea off Japan, I think. And then beside there we have the names of the guys who were in the band that used to play in Wembury Church, and in the Second World War they were in the convoys going to Russia, and sadly the ships would get iced up, and it fired its torpedo and it went around and did a circle and came back and torpedoed the ship. And most of the band were stokers and in the bottom of the ship, and they were all lost at sea. So because of their connection to Wembury, Mrs. Edna Boyanitz did this little sign and painted it for them with all their names. We're here in the vestry, and behind me is the marvellous Millennium window that was designed by Rex Booth, and also the statue, the wooden statue beside. So we have to thank Rex Booth for that. And either side of me I have 2 memorials. This one is to the daughter of Francis Ryder. Francis Ryder, who I mentioned before, was a gentleman of Down Thomas. The Ryders came here in the 1500s. They were originally tenants of the Prior of Plympton at Wembury Manor, and when Sir John Heale came, they gradually moved out of there and had West Wembury Farm for a while. And the last of them, Francis Ryder, ended up at Farm Barton. And this one here is dedicated to his daughter. He lost, I think, a son and 2 daughters, and in the end left his estate to the Harwoods in the floor behind there. This one plaque up here, very high plaque, is dedicated to Admiral Charles Boyles, and he was obviously staying in Wembury somewhere, probably friendly with Admiral Everett Carmody. There was also Admiral Vincent was also at Stadiscombe, so there was a gathering of admirals, I guess, at the time. And Charles Boyles is obviously buried in the floor beneath me, I think. Not his dedication up there. Here in the North Aisle, we have a big ledger for Thomas Lockyer, who died in 1806, and he was the one who built the present Wembury House. And before it was completed, he was on his way home from Plymouth, and his pony was frightened by a cow that was asleep under the hedge. And when the cow got up, the horse stumbled, and he was thrown out of his carriage, and sadly he had a very bad break and he got gangrene, and he was taken to Captain Bulteel's house at Hoo, and there he, poor chap, died, and that's a big stone dedicated to him and his wife. Moving up the road, here we have St Nor to the Lay family, John Lay of Down Thomas, and this is Nathaniel Willing. Nathaniel Willing was farmed at West Wembury and had Higher Ford Farm, and his daughter married the Attrell. Sarah Attrell was a Willing, and she farmed at West Wembury Farm for some time and has big tablets outside to the Attrell family. And then above that one we have this is the tablet to Vice Admiral Boyles, who we mentioned in the Vestry. This is his tablet in the floor. Oh, that one, this big one here, is dedicated to the Ryders. Francis Ryder's daughters are buried there. Here's the tablet that tells of the restoration in 1886 by Richard Corey. Richard Corey was a wealthy man, had made his money taking coal from South Wales to London, and he came to and bought Langdon estate in 1876 from the Carmodys, and he set about restoring the church. And what we see today, the box pews have gone and the floor has been relaid, and it's all thanks to Richard Corey in 1886. On the wall here we have 2 memorials to the Dawson family. Rolf Dawson was a merchant from Liverpool and came down to Wembury and settled in Wembury House, and he was there for quite a while, and he built Watergate cottages, Dawson's cottages they were called at one time, for his workmen who worked on his estate. And the plaque below is dedicated to his wife Jane, who died in 1892. Here at the top of the North Aisle is a lovely carving of the Last Supper, presented by the son of the Reverend Burgess. And the Reverend Burgess was the vicar here for 40 years, and he lived in the vicarage over by Thorne, and I think he actually purchased it, and he owned the vicarage. Miss Coleman was his housekeeper after his wife died, and he was there when John Galsworthy came to Wembury searching for his ancestors, and the Reverend Burgess found the tithe map and pointed out to John Galsworthy the big field over at Wembury Point called Great Galsworthy, and that features in his Foresight saga when he calls it Great Foresight. And above the Reverend Burgess's memorial is another one to Thomas Lockyer. This is Thomas Lockyer and his wife Thomas Jr., that lived at Thorne, and it was originally Lockyer's cottage, and then it became South Wembury Court at one time, and finally Thorne. And Thomas Lockyer was the eldest son, and when he was a lad he was sent to France, as merchants did in those days. They would have had a French lad over in exchange. But unfortunately he was caught in the Napoleonic Wars and he couldn't get back. And the people he was staying with didn't want him, so he ended up joining the Foreign Legion as a drummer boy. He finally got down to Bordeaux and escaped on an American ship that was aware of his family. And they met, because we were at war, they met somewhere and exchanged the lad with a Plymouth boat, and he was brought home. So quite an experience for a young lad. And they used to say when he was angry, he would sit on his veranda at Thorne and beat the drum. Now we're going down the centre aisle. Above me here is a tablet to Courtney Connell, Esquire, and his son John Connell. Courtney Connell was a Plymouth merchant, and he bought Manor Farm at Down Thomas and became Lord of the Manor of Down Thomas. And this was way back in 1700 and something. And it stayed in the family because his daughter Mary married Prance. And it stayed with the Prance family right up to the 1920s. The Prances were, of course, solicitors in Plymouth, well known, and also surgeons as well, a very well-known family. And the other side we have William Hook. He was a surgeon and lived at Plympton at Longcourse House, and he was the grandson of James Hook, who was the big farmer of the Langdon and Down Thomas area, farmed all that area. And William Hook became the surgeon, but he unfortunately died at the age of 44, just after he had been married. So that was quite sad. If we go further up the aisle, we have another Lockyer plaque. This is Thomas Lockyer and Anne. This is the first Thomas Lockyer that had the accident before his house was finished. And his wife Anne, who stayed on in the house till about 1820 in Wembury House. And also remembers Orlando. Orlando was one of his sons who was caught fighting a duel, and it was when duels were illegal, and unfortunately the other chap was killed. So Orlando made a quick exit and went off, and he was in the West Indies in the Navy, and sadly he died in the West Indies, quite a young man. On the other side we have sacred to Sir Edward Thornton. A big plaque on the other side is for his wife and some of his sons. This one is for him when he died, aged 86, I think. Above me here is the plaque for Charles Biggs Comedy. He was the son of Paulson Comedy, who inherited. He was the son of the Admiral Comedy, and he was the Lord of the Manor here for quite some time, and they did a lot of development at that time. A lot of the farms were rebuilt, and the estate increased in size from just being at Langdon. It came across to most of Wembury as the Lockyers sold off the estate, so the Comedies bought more land. But unfortunately, Charles Biggs, his son and heir, Vincent, he didn't do what he was supposed to do. He went off hunting and lived up at North Devon, and didn't pay much attention to Langdon, and he got into debt and had to sell off parts of it. And in the end, in 1876, he sold the estate to the Corey family. So that was the end of the Carmodys. The other side over here is to Charles Biggs's mother, Paulson, spelt Polexven Carmody. Strange name for a lady, but that was her name. She was the widow of Admiral Carmody, she'd married, and he changed his name to Carmody. And that's her epitaph up there. We're now up in the altar area, and in the floor is a lot of several Carmodys, and there is the entrance to the Carmody vault. And the Carmodys were at Langdon for many, many years, came in 1555 or thereabouts, and built the house and restored it at various times. And the line was sort of unbroken until we get to Waldo, and Waldo's buried there. And he had a chest full of gold coins when he died. And then it went for 30 years, I mentioned 30 years, nobody here. And then it went to cousin Paulson Carmody up there. So we have several Carmodys. This one up here is dedicated to Paulson's husband, Admiral Everett Carmody. And in the corner we have the early ones for Josias. There were two Josias Carmodys. I think there was three Josias Carmodys, one after the other. And they're all buried there, and that's sort of Langdon side. And originally the Narborough Memorial was up here as well. And it was then moved into the Vestry corner, and then finally moved to the bottom corner. And on this side here we have the Heel Memorial. And Sir John Heel came and settled at Wembury Manor and knocked down the monkish building that was there and built a huge house costing £32,000. And he was sergeant at law to Elizabeth I and James II. And James I. And the Heels originally came from Cornwood area, and they gradually did well and were educated, and there was a big family of them, lots of Heels, and they owned lots of land in Devon. There's Heel schools named after them, and lots of things are named after them with charities. Heel charities. And here we have laid out, and it would have been a very colourful monument when it was built. And we have Sir John laid out in his red robes, and beneath him is his wife. And then all their sons are along the front, 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 sons, and 2 daughters on the side. And then there was a little daughter that is up the end in a chair as a baby, and she's supposed to have choked on a plumstone and died young. But all the others survived to adulthood, apparently. So we have a very big monument there with the coat of arms and everything dedicated to Sir John Heel. Above me here, high up in front of the Heel monument, is a helmet, and this one we believe is a replica of Sir Warwick Heel's helmet. The original, we believe, is in the Plymouth Museum, but this replica was put up there to replace the original. Sir Warwick is remembered, of course, with the Sir Warwick Heel almshouses, which are still going strong. After, I believe Sir Warwick died in 1620, so his memory lives on. John Gibson has been the organist here for 40 years, Would you like to tell us something about the organ, John?
Yes, the organ was made by Peter Conacher, a firm based up in the Midlands, and it was built around about 1900, and it was placed in the Methodist Church in Bristol, then came here in the late 70s, and it was added to and some alterations made by Heel and Plymouth organ builders, and that's more or less as you see it today, although some additions were made in 2013. The organ is basically mechanical, but some of the additions that we made in 2013 were electric in operation, and that hasn't been a complete success, I have to say. But nonetheless, this is the organ as you see it today, and we'll try and make some music out of it.
Thank you very much. Perhaps you'd like to play us out.